I was warned that the mansion had one rule: never open the door at the end of the east hallway. The strange thing was, nobody ever told me why. I still remember the night I arrived at Whitmore Estate. The rain covered the long driveway like a silver curtain, and the headlights of my old Ford Taurus reflected against the towering gates as I pulled my suitcase closer to me. I was 24 years old, carrying everything I owned in 2 bags and a hope that this job would finally help me start over. The mansion looked like something from another world. Stone walls, endless windows, and warm golden lights glowing behind them. It was beautiful, but it felt like the kind of beauty that came with secrets. My name is Emily Carter, and I never imagined that becoming a maid would place me in the path of Alexander Whitmore, the man everyone in New York whispered about. They called him a businessman. Others called him something much darker. But when I first saw him, I didn't see a legend. I saw a man standing alone in a quiet room, staring at a photograph like he was trying to remember a life he had lost. The house manager, Mrs. Bennett, handed me my uniform and gave me a serious look. "Emily, do your work, keep your distance, and never enter the east hallway." I smiled nervously. That sounds like a very specific warning. She looked toward the second floor before lowering her voice. "Some doors are closed for a reason." I wanted to ask more, but she walked away before I could. My first day was supposed to be simple: clean the library, prepare breakfast, organize the guest rooms, stay invisible. That was how maids survived in places like this. But Alexander Whitmore noticed everything. I learned that within hours. He noticed when a painting was slightly crooked. He noticed when a vase was moved 3 inches from its original position. He noticed when someone entered a room, even after they tried to leave no trace behind. Yet somehow he noticed me too. "You're new," he said from behind me while I was arranging books in the library. I turned around quickly. He stood near the doorway wearing a dark suit, his expression calm but unreadable. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore," I started. "Today, most people avoid this room." I looked around at the shelves filled with old books and family records. I suppose I'm not most people. For a moment, silence filled the room. I expected him to be annoyed. Instead, something changed in his expression, almost like he was surprised someone had answered him honestly. "No," he said quietly. "You're not." That was the first time I saw the man behind the reputation. Not the powerful figure everyone feared. Not the person who controlled an empire from behind closed doors. Just a man who seemed tired of being treated like he wasn't human. Later that evening, while cleaning the upper floor, I found myself standing in front of the forbidden door. I didn't know why I stopped there. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the feeling that something important was hidden behind it. My hand reached toward the handle. The door opened before I touched it, and standing on the other side was Alexander Whitmore. His eyes moved from the room behind me to my face. For the first time since I arrived, the man who seemed impossible to surprise looked completely caught off guard. "Who told you this room existed?" he asked. And in that moment, I realized I had just stepped into a story far bigger than a simple job. The first thing I learned about Alexander Whitmore was that silence followed him everywhere. After that night in the East hallway, I expected anger. I expected to lose my job before I even finished my first week. Instead, the next morning arrived with the same quiet routine as if nothing had happened. The mansion woke before the sun came up. The sound of coffee being prepared in the kitchen, the soft footsteps of staff moving through the marble halls, and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock created a rhythm I slowly began to recognize. But something had changed. I knew there was a secret inside those walls, and I knew Alexander knew I had seen it. I kept my distance. That was the safest choice. People like him were not people you try to understand. They were people you respected from far away. At least, that was what everyone told me. During breakfast, I noticed something unusual. Alexander sat at the end of the long dining table, surrounded by expensive silverware and untouched food. He looked like someone who owned everything but enjoyed nothing. Mrs. Bennett placed the morning newspaper beside him and quietly walked away. I was clearing the table when he spoke. "You are not afraid of asking questions." I stopped for a moment. I think everyone has questions. Most people just choose not to ask them. His eyes lifted toward mine. Those eyes were impossible to read. Cold on the surface, but carrying something much heavier underneath. "And what questions do you have?" I looked down at the empty coffee cup in front of him. Why does someone who has everything look like he has nothing? The room became completely still. I immediately realized I had said too much. A maid was not supposed to speak that way to her employer. I prepared myself for the consequences. But Alexander did not become angry. He simply looked away. You should be careful, Emily. His voice was calm. Truth can be dangerous in my world. I lowered my eyes. Maybe. But pretending everything is fine can be dangerous too. For the first time, I saw a small change in his expression. Not a smile. Not warmth. Something smaller. Like a person remembering what it felt like to be seen. Over the next few days, I noticed details about Alexander that nobody talked about. He always checked on the elderly gardener before starting his meetings. He remembered every employee's name. He quietly made sure the staff had what they needed without expecting anyone to thank him. The world outside the mansion saw only his power. But inside these walls, I saw pieces of a different man. A man who carried a weight he never explained. One evening, while organizing books in the library, I found an old journal hidden behind a row of novels. I did not open it. I knew better than to cross that line again. But before I could put it back, Alexander appeared in the doorway. He looked at the journal, then at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. You could have read it, he said. But you did not. I placed it back carefully. Some things belong to people until they are ready to share them. The silence between us felt different this time. Less like a wall, more like a door slowly opening. Alexander walked closer, took the journal, and held it in his hand. 3 years ago, he said quietly, I stopped letting anyone get close enough to disappoint me. I listened without interrupting. And now? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. Now I am wondering why you are the first person who did not try to take anything from me. I did not have an answer, because I did not understand it either. I only knew one thing. The man everyone believed was untouchable had started letting me see the person hidden behind the name Alexander Whitmore. The first time I realized Alexander Whitmore was not as cold as everyone believed was the night I saw him standing in the garden alone. The mansion was quiet after midnight. The kind of quiet where every small sound felt important. The wind moved through the trees, the fountain outside whispered softly, and the lights from the house reflected across the wet stone pathway. I had been finishing my last task for the evening when I noticed a light still on in the garden room. I expected to find a staff member. Instead, I found Alexander. He was standing near the window, looking out at the empty grounds with the same expression I had seen before. Like someone carrying memories he could not put down. I almost walked away. Almost. But then he spoke without turning around. You always hesitate before leaving. I froze. I am sorry, Mr. Whitmore. I did not mean to interrupt. That is not what I said. His voice was calm, not angry. You hesitate because you wonder if someone needs help. I did not know how to answer. Nobody had ever noticed something so small about me. I simply shrugged. Maybe I just do not like seeing people alone. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked at me. Most people prefer powerful people to be alone. It makes them feel safer. That sentence stayed with me, because behind those words was something I had not expected. Loneliness. Over the next few days, I began seeing more of the man behind the reputation. Alexander was still demanding, still serious, still someone who carried himself like the entire world was watching. But I noticed things others ignored. He remembered that Mrs. Bennet had a doctor appointment and arranged transportation for her without making it a big deal. He replaced the old kitchen equipment after noticing the staff struggling with it. He left handwritten notes thanking employees for their work, even though he never signed his name. The man everyone described as unreachable was quietly taking care of everyone around him. I started wondering how many people had misunderstood him because they only saw the power, not the person. One afternoon, I found him in the library looking through old family records. He quickly closed the folder when I entered. I thought this room was usually empty, he said. It is, I replied. I came to return a book. His eyes moved to the book in my hand. You read history? Sometimes. I like knowing where things came from. He looked back at the closed folder. Some histories are better left forgotten. I placed the book on the shelf. Maybe, but forgetting something does not always make it disappear. Those words seemed to affect him more than I expected. He walked toward the window and stayed silent for several seconds. Then he asked, "Why did you become a maid, Emily?" It was a simple question, but something about the way he asked made it feel different. Not like an employer asking an employee, like a person asking another person. Because I needed a fresh start, I said. And because I believe every job matters if you do it with care. Alexander looked at me carefully. You really believe that? Yes. Even here. I smiled slightly. especially here. For the first time, I saw something I never expected from Alexander Whitmore. Not power, not control, not distance. I saw curiosity. He was trying to understand me. And somehow, I was beginning to do the same. But I did not know yet that the reason Alexander kept everyone away for 3 years was connected to a secret hidden inside this mansion. A secret that would change everything I thought I knew about him. I used to believe that powerful people built walls because they wanted to keep others out. But after spending more time inside Whitmore Estate, I realized some walls were built because someone was afraid of what would happen if they finally let someone in. Days turned into weeks, and my life at the mansion began to feel strangely normal. I learned the rhythm of the house. I knew when the morning sunlight reached the library windows. I knew which flowers Mrs. Bennet preferred for the dining room table. I knew that Alexander Whitmore drank his coffee black, but always forgot to finish the last few sips. Small details. Ordinary things. The kind of things nobody noticed about him because everyone was too focused on the image he created. But I noticed. Maybe that was the problem. Because Alexander started noticing me too. It began with small moments. He would ask my opinion about a book before returning it to the shelf. He would stop during his busy schedule to ask how my day was going. He never treated me like I was invisible. And that was something I did not expect from a man like him. One afternoon, I was arranging flowers in the main hallway when I heard a disagreement near the office. I was not trying to listen. I truly was not. But the voices carried through the open doorway. One of the senior employees was speaking harshly about one of the kitchen staff members, blaming her for a mistake she did not make. I watched as the woman stood quietly, too nervous to defend herself. Something inside me told me to stay silent. That was what people did in places like this. They protected themselves. They avoided problems. But I remembered something my mother always told me. Doing the right thing is still important when nobody rewards you for it. So I stepped forward. Excuse me, but I think there is something you should know. The room became quiet. Everyone turned toward me. Alexander was there, sitting behind his desk. His expression gave nothing away. The employee looked surprised that I had interrupted. Emily, this does not concern you, he said. His tone was firm, but not cruel. I looked at him. Maybe it does not. But someone should say something. I explained what I had seen. I explained that the mistake was not caused by the person being blamed. When I finished, nobody spoke. I expected Alexander to dismiss me. Instead, he looked at the employee, then back at me. Thank you for telling the truth. Those words surprised everyone, including me. After the situation was resolved, I returned to my duties. But later that evening, Alexander found me in the library. You understand that most people would have stayed quiet. I closed the book I was holding. I know. Then why did you speak? I thought about the question. Because being afraid does not mean you should stop being kind. Alexander looked away for a moment. There was something different in his silence. It was not distance. It was reflection. 3 years ago, he said softly, I trusted someone who changed everything. I waited, but he did not continue. And after that, you stopped trusting anyone? I asked. He looked back at me. I stopped giving people the chance to hurt me. His honesty caught me off guard. For the first time, Alexander was not the mysterious man everyone talked about. He was simply someone who had been disappointed and decided the safest place to live was behind a locked door. But what he did not know was that doors were meant to open eventually. And I had a feeling his was already beginning to move. The night everything changed began with a sound I had never heard inside Whitmore Estate before. A sound that did not belong in a place built on silence. The sharp ring of Alexander's phone echoed through the library, followed by the sudden change in the atmosphere around him. I was organizing the shelves nearby when I noticed his expression shift. Not fear, not panic, something else. The kind of concern a person tries to hide when they are used to carrying every problem alone. He ended the call and immediately reached for his coat. I had seen Alexander handle difficult conversations before. I had seen him remain calm when others became nervous. But this was different. Is everything okay? I asked before I could stop myself. He looked at me for a moment. You should stay inside tonight. His answer was simple, but it created more questions than it answered. Why? He paused. Most people would have accepted the order without asking. But I had learned something about Alexander. The more someone avoided a subject, the more important it usually was. Because sometimes the world outside this house is not as safe as it appears, he finally said. I looked at him carefully. And you think keeping everyone away protects them? For a second, he looked surprised. Maybe because nobody spoke to him that way. Maybe because nobody challenged the idea that his distance was a form of protection. "You think I am wrong?" he asked. I lowered my voice. "I think you believe you are protecting people. But sometimes people do not need to be protected from the truth. They need someone to trust." The words stayed between us. Then Alexander did something unexpected. He sat down, not as an employer, not as the owner of the mansion, just as a tired man sitting across from another person. "3 years ago, I lost someone because I trusted the wrong person," he said. I listened quietly. "After that, I decided never to give anyone the opportunity to become my weakness again." There it was. The reason behind the walls. The reason behind the silence. Alexander Whitmore was not empty. He was protecting a wound nobody was allowed to see. "Maybe the problem is not that you trusted someone," I said gently. "Maybe the problem is that one person made you believe everyone else would do the same." He looked at me, and for a moment, the powerful man everyone knew disappeared. There was only Alexander, the man who wanted to believe, but did not know how anymore. The next morning, something unusual happened. I found a small note on the kitchen counter. It was written in Alexander's handwriting. "Thank you for speaking honestly." For simple words, but from a man who rarely showed appreciation, they meant more than a long speech. Later that afternoon, I found him in the garden near the old fountain. He was looking at the flowers I had planted a few days earlier. "They survived," he said. I smiled. "Flowers are stronger than people think." He looked at the garden, then back at me. "You always find a way to see the good in things." "Not always," I replied. "I just think everyone deserves someone who tries." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The wind moved through the trees, and the mansion felt less cold than before. But I did not know that while Alexander was slowly opening his world to me, someone else was watching the changes inside that house. Someone who knew the secrets Alexander had spent years trying to bury. And soon, those secrets would find their way back to us. The morning after Alexander left me that handwritten note, I found myself thinking about something I never expected. I was no longer afraid of the silence inside Whitmore Estate. In the beginning, every hallway felt like a place filled with rules I did not understand. Every closed door seemed to hide another secret. But slowly, the mansion started feeling less like a fortress and more like a home. Maybe it was because I had started seeing the people who lived there as more than their positions. Mrs. Bennett was not just the house manager. She was someone who had spent years protecting the people around her. The gardeners were not just employees. They were people with families, dreams, and stories. And Alexander was not just the man everyone whispered about. He was someone trying to remember how to trust again. A few days later, I found him in the library earlier than usual. He was standing near the window, holding an old book in his hands. The sunlight reached across the room, creating a warm glow against the wooden shelves. It was one of the rare moments when he looked peaceful. "You are here early," I said. He looked up. "So are you." I smiled. "Someone has to make sure this place does not become covered in dust." A small expression appeared on his face. Not exactly a smile, but close. I had started noticing those small changes. They were rare, but they were real. "You have changed this house," he said. I looked around. "I only arranged flowers and cleaned rooms." "That is not what I mean." His voice became quieter. "People here seem different." I thought about that. Maybe they were always the same. Maybe they just needed someone to remind them they mattered. Alexander looked away, and I knew I had touched something important. Later that afternoon, I noticed one of the younger kitchen staff members looking upset. She had made a mistake with the schedule and was worried she would lose her position. I sat with her for a few minutes and helped fix the problem. It was a small thing, something anyone could have done. But that evening, Alexander mentioned it. "You helped her." I looked surprised. "How did you know?" "I pay attention." There was something almost amusing about hearing him say that. Of course he paid attention. Alexander noticed everything. "It was not a big deal," I replied. "It was to her." His answer was simple. I looked at him carefully. "You really do care about the people here." For a moment, he was quiet. Then he said, "I used to believe caring made people weak. And now," he looked toward the window, "now I think refusing to care is what makes people empty." Those words stayed with me, because they showed me how far he had already come. The man who once built walls around himself was slowly learning that connection was not something to fear. But change is never invisible, especially in a world where people benefit from someone staying the same. That night, I noticed Alexander standing near the east hallway again. The same hallway where I had found the hidden room weeks earlier. This time, he was not guarding the door. He was simply standing there, remembering. When he saw me, he did not tell me to leave. Instead, he said something I never expected to hear. "Emily, there is something about my past you deserve to know." My heart slowed. I knew that sentence meant the distance between us was about to change forever, because some secrets do not disappear when you hide them. They wait for the right person to uncover the truth. The room at the end of the east hallway had always felt like a place frozen in time. But that evening, when Alexander finally opened the door and invited me inside, I realized it was not a room filled with secrets. It was a room filled with memories. I followed him slowly, careful not to disturb the quiet that surrounded the space. The air smelled like old books and polished wood. A small piano rested near the window. A collection of photographs stood on a wooden table. Everything was arranged perfectly, as if someone had left only yesterday. Alexander walked toward one of the photographs and picked it up. For the first time since I met him, I saw hesitation in his eyes. "This is the part of my life nobody knows," he said. I stayed silent, not because I was afraid, but because I understood that some stories needed patience. 3 years ago, I believed I knew who I could trust, he continued. I believed I had built a life where everything had a place. Then one decision changed everything. He placed the photograph back on the table. After that, I decided distance was easier. If nobody got close, nobody could disappoint me. I looked around the room. The answer had been here all along. The reason for the silence. The reason for the locked door. "You kept this room because you did not want to forget," I said softly. Alexander looked at me. "Maybe. Or maybe because you were afraid that forgetting would mean letting go." He did not respond immediately, but I knew my words reached him. That was the strange thing about Alexander Whitmore. Everyone saw his confidence, his control, his ability to make decisions without hesitation. But underneath all of that was someone who was still trying to understand his own emotions. Before we left the room, something caught my attention. A small silver pendant resting beside the photograph. It looked simple, but it seemed important. Alexander noticed where I was looking. That belonged to someone important to me. His voice changed slightly. Someone who believed there was still good in people, even when the world gave them reasons not to. I looked at him. Sounds like someone I would have liked to meet. A quiet sadness crossed his face. "I think you would have understood each other." The next morning, something unexpected happened. I received a message from Mrs. Bennett asking me to meet her in the kitchen. When I arrived, she looked more serious than usual. "Emily, there is something you should know." I waited. Not everyone in this house is comfortable with the changes happening. I understood what she meant. Alexander was different. He was talking more. He was listening more. He was allowing people closer than before. Change can make people uncertain, especially those who benefited from things staying the same. "Should I be worried?" I asked. Mrs. Bennett shook her head. "No, but you should be careful with your heart." Her words stayed with me throughout the day, because I had started realizing something I could not ignore. I came to Whitmore Estate looking for a job. I never expected to become part of Alexander's story. I never expected to see the person behind the reputation. And I never expected that the man everyone believed was impossible to reach would become the person who made me feel seen. But as I walked through the hallway that evening, I noticed Alexander standing near the window, looking at the garden. He turned when he heard my footsteps. "Emily," he said quietly, "there is still something you do not know." I stopped. "What is it?" He looked toward the old photograph room. The reason I never let anyone close was not only because of what happened 3 years ago. His expression became serious. It was because I was afraid the past would find me again. And at that moment, I realized the secrets inside Whitmore Estate were much deeper than I ever imagined. The truth about Alexander Whitmore was never hidden in one place. It was scattered across years of memories, unfinished conversations, and a silence that had lasted far too long. After that night in the East hallway, I started seeing him differently. Not because I knew every detail of his past, but because I finally understood why he carried so much distance between himself and everyone else. A few days passed after our conversation in the hidden room. The mansion returned to its familiar rhythm, but something between Alexander and me had changed. There was a quiet trust that had not existed before. He no longer looked at me like someone who worked for him. He looked at me like someone whose presence mattered. One afternoon, I found him in the garden again, the same place where I had first noticed the man behind the reputation. He was standing beside the flowers I had planted, watching them grow. You were right, he said. I smiled slightly. About what? Flowers are stronger than people think. I laughed softly. I did not expect you to remember that. He looked at the garden. I remember more than people realize. There was something different about him. The man who once avoided every personal conversation was now choosing to have one. Alexander, I said carefully, what happened 3 years ago? The question was simple, but I knew it carried a lot of weight. He looked down for a moment before answering. I lost someone who reminded me that there was still kindness in the world. He paused. And after that, I convinced myself that kindness was something I could no longer afford. I listened quietly. But then you arrived, he continued. And you started doing the same things without even realizing it. I looked away, unsure how to respond. I'm just doing what feels right. That is exactly why it matters. His words surprised me. Alexander Whitmore was someone surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Money, influence, opportunities. But I had never wanted anything from him except honesty. Later that evening, I walked through the main hallway and noticed a painting I had never seen before. It was an old family portrait that had been moved from storage. I stopped when I noticed a familiar detail. The woman standing beside a younger Alexander wore the same silver pendant I had seen in the hidden room. Before I could look closer, Alexander appeared behind me. You found it. His voice was quiet. I turned around. Who was she? For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he answered, someone who believed people could change. I looked at him. And do you believe that now? His eyes met mine. I am starting to. That moment felt important. Not because everything was suddenly fixed. Not because the past disappeared. But because Alexander was finally allowing himself to imagine something beyond it. The next morning, I noticed a change throughout the house. The staff seemed more relaxed. Conversations that once stopped when Alexander entered the room continued. People were no longer just working around him. They were connecting with him. He had not become a different person overnight. He was still serious. Still reserved. Still Alexander Whitmore. But there was a warmth beneath the surface that had not been there before. Then, while I was organizing the library, I found a small envelope placed on the desk. My name was written on the front. Inside was a single note. There is something I should have told you from the beginning. I looked toward the doorway. Alexander was standing there. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried uncertainty. Emily, he said, the reason you came to this house was not completely by chance. My heart stopped for a moment. Because suddenly, I understood. The story I thought I had entered was not the full story, and Alexander had been waiting for the right moment to tell me why I was really there. The envelope in my hands felt heavier than it should have. It was only a few pieces of paper, but somehow I knew they carried answers I had been searching for since the day I arrived at Whitmore Estate. Alexander stood across from me, quiet and patient, waiting for me to decide if I was ready to hear the truth. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a photograph. An old photograph. My eyes moved across the image, and my breath caught. It was a picture of Alexander's family years ago, but there was something else. Something I never expected. My own last name was written on the back. Carter. How? I whispered. Alexander looked down. Your family and mine were connected long before you came here. I looked at him, confused. Then why did nobody tell me? He took a slow breath. Because some people believed keeping the past hidden would protect everyone. I studied his expression. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in him. Not the confident man who made decisions without hesitation. Not the person everyone respected from a distance. Just Alexander, standing in front of a truth he had carried alone for years. He explained that my family had once been close to his. Not through power or business, but through trust. The people who came before us had believed that loyalty was more valuable than wealth. But after everything changed 3 years ago, those connections disappeared. When I saw you at the mansion, Alexander said, I noticed things that felt familiar. The way you treated people. The way you looked at the world. I looked at the photograph again. So you hired me because of my family. His silence answered before his words did. At first, I wanted to understand why fate brought you here. That sentence stayed with me. Fate. It was a word I had never expected someone like Alexander Whitmore to use. And now? I asked. He looked directly at me. Now I know you are here because of who you are. Not because of where you came from. Those words mattered more than I expected. Because somewhere along the way, I had started wondering if I truly belonged in his world. But Alexander was telling me something different. I was not important because of a connection from the past. I was important because of the person I had become. That evening, I walked through the mansion with a different feeling. The same walls were around me, the same rooms, the same quiet halls, but they no longer felt like a place where I did not belong. They felt like a place where a new chapter had begun. Later, I found Alexander in the library, the room where we had first spoken honestly. "You know," I said, "when I arrived here, I thought you were the most intimidating person I had ever met." A small smile appeared on his face. "And now," I looked at him, "now I think you are someone who spent years convincing yourself you did not need anyone." He did not argue, because he knew it was true. "Emily," he said quietly, "you changed this house." I shook my head. "No, I think this house was waiting for someone to remind everyone inside it that they were still human." For a moment, there was only silence. But this time, the silence felt peaceful. The kind of silence that comes when people no longer need to hide. I had entered Whitmore Estate looking for a fresh start. I never expected to uncover a forgotten connection, a hidden history, or the heart of a man everyone thought was impossible to reach. But I learned something about Alexander Whitmore. The world saw his power. I saw his humanity. And maybe that was the one thing he had been searching for all along.